What happens back? A acclimatized announcer decides he has had abundant of aristocratic angle and bifold standards of his post-royal career. Today we are diving into the atomic battle that larboard admirers stunned. Hit that subscribe button and bead a animate version beneath absolution me aperceive. What you ahead about celebrity interviews that go absolutely off the rails. Your assurance helps this access abound, and I apprehend every distinct comment. The Good Morning America flat-bashed, with its accepted pre-show energy, cameras positioned perfectly, lighting adapted to adulatory angles. George Stephanopoulos sat beyond from Prince Harry, who appeared airy and confident. Acutely assured addition, affectionate account about his latest accommodating endeavor. The promotional abstracts had appropriate a ablaze chat about brainy bloom advancement and his accessible projects. What Harry did not ahead was that Stephanopoulos had spent weeks advancing for this moment, armed with research, contradictions, and a assurance to ask the questions added journalists had avoided. Your Aristocratic Highness, Stephanopoulos began, his accent professional, but with an bend that anon bent Harry off guard. Thank you for abutting us this morning. I appetite to alpha with article that has been adverse abounding of our viewers. You acquire, announced abundantly about your admiration for privacy, yet you abide to a rise in high-profile interviews, documentaries, and now you are autograph edition book. How do you accommodate these acutely adverse positions? Harry confused. Hardly in his chair, his media-accomplished smile aged for aloof a moment. Well, George, I ahead there is a aberration amid administration. My accuracy and accepting my aloofness invaded aback. I allege publicly it is on my agreement about issues that amount to me. On your terms, Stephanopoulos repeated, aptitude advanced. Slightly, but is it absolutely about the issues, or is it about authoritative the narrative? Because from area I sit, it seems like you appetite aloofness, aback at apparel you and publicity aback at allowances you financially. The artlessness of the catechism visibly abashed. Harry. This was not the affable acid he had developed, acclimatized to from American media. Aggregate I acquired done has been to afford a blaze on important causes, and to acquaint the accuracy about what happened to my family. Your truth, Stephanopoulos emphasized. You acquire fabricated some actual austere accusations about your ancestors' accusations that acquire damaged relationships and aching bodies who cannot acknowledge publicly. Do you any time exceed their ancillary of the story? Harry's accord began. To crack, my ancestors has had decades to acquaint their ancillary of the adventure through the British press. They acquire never lacked for platforms or affectionate coverage. Acquire they, though, Stephanopoulos pressed, because what I see is a ancestors that has remained abundantly bashful while you acquire accustomed account afterwards interview. Fabricated, documentary afterwards, documentary, accounting book afterwards book, all painting them in an added abrogating light. Area, is there appropriate to privacy? Area, is there appropriate to dignity? The prince's jaw tightened. They acquire the absolute British enactment, attention them. George, they acquire the Alcazar machinery, the courtiers, the affable journalists. I had to allege out because I was actuality destroyed by lies, and I had no added recourse. But were they lies? Stephanopoulos asked pointedly. Or were they aloof belief you did not like because there was a aberration amid apocryphal advice and aspersing coverage, and from what I can see, abundant of what you acquire, alleged lies were absolutely aloof. Letters about your behavior, your decisions, your accomplishments that you artlessly did not acknowledge seeing in print. Harry leaned back, his aristocratic training wearing with his accessible frustration. George, I ahead, you are oversimplifying a actual circuitous situation. The British media has a continued history of targeting associates of my family, decidedly. The women we love. They destroyed my mother's activity, and they were aggravating to abort my wife's life. Your mother's bearings was tragic. Absolutely, Stephanopoulos acknowledged, but your wife's bearings was different, was it not? She was not hounded by photographers to the aforementioned extent, but it was additionally the accustomed akin of analysis that comes with marrying into the best acclaimed ancestors in the world. Did you absolutely apprehend her to be advised abnormally than every added aristocratic helpmate in history? Because she is American? Because she is biracial? Because she represented change that assertive bodies could not accept. That may be authentic in some cases, Stephanopoulos conceded, but can you candidly say that all the abrogating advantage was racially motivated? Can you candidly say that none of it was deserved? Because what I acquire empiric is a arrangement area? Any criticism of your wife gets labeled as racism. Any abrogating adventure gets absolved as lies. At what point do you booty albatross for your own accomplishments and decisions? The catechism, afraid in the air like a bomb cat and mouse to explode. Harry's face ablaze red, his easily arresting the accoutrements of his chair. I ahead this band of analytic is absolutely inappropriate. George, I came actuality to altercate my accommodating assignment, and instead, you are advancing my ancestors. And my wife, I am not advancing anyone, Stephanopoulos replied calmly. I am allurement questions that millions of bodies want. Answered questions that added journalists acquire, been too affable or too abashed to ask. You acquire fabricated yourself, a accessible figure. You acquire accounting books, accustomed interviews, fabricated accusations. Those accomplishments acquire after effects, and they deserve scrutiny. It's absolutely why we had to leave, Harry said, his articulation afrayed with emotion. This is absolutely the affectionate of adverse analysis that collection us abroad from Britain. American journalism is different, Stephanopoulos replied. We ask adamantine questions behindhand of someone's appellation or status. We do not accord anyone a chargeless canyon aloof because they are aristocratic or acclaimed or wealthy and appropriate. Now the adamantine catechism is this. Do you, anytime booty albatross for annihilation that has gone amiss in your activity? Or is it consistently, addition, else's fault? The blackout that followed Stephanopoulos' catechism about claimed albatross was deafening. Camera operators exchanged glances. Producers captivated their breath. And admirers beyond America watched as Prince Harry struggled to acquisition his basement in what had become the best arduous account of his life. That is an abundantly loaded question, George Harry assuredly responded, his articulation bound with almost controlled anger. Of course, I booty albatross for my decisions. I took albatross aback, I abstively to serve my country in Afghanistan. I took albatross aback, I abstively to put my family's assurance aboriginal and leave Britain. Every aloft accommodation in my activity has been about demography responsibility. Stephanopoulos nodded slowly, but his announcement remained skeptical. Those are absolutely big decisions, but I am talking about the abate ones, the accustomed choices that led to the bearings. You activate yourself in, for instance, you acquire announced about activity trapped in your aristocratic role. But did anyone force you to a fair in Las Vegas? Did anyone force you to abrasion that Nazi costume? Did anyone force you to accomplish those comments about your aggressive account that affronted so abounding veterans? Harry's eyes flashed with indignation. Those were mistakes I fabricated aback. I was adolescent and afflicted and disturbing with brainy bloom issues. I apologize for them, repeatedly, but they do not ascertain who I am today. Fair enough, Stephanopoulos replied. But what about added contempo decisions? What about the timing of your Oprah account, which aired while your grandfathering was dying in the hospital? What about the Netflix documentary that was appear aloof as your ancestors was ambidextrous with your grandmother's afterlife and your father's new role as king? Did you exceed the impulse of those choices on the bodies you claim to love? The catechism hit Harry. Like a authentic blow, his accord absurd, added as he leaned forward. His articulation acceptable defensive. We had accustomed obligations, George. These projects were years in the making. We could not abolish aggregate because of ancestors' dynamics. Accustomed obligations, Stephanopoulos repeated, his accent decrepit with disbelief. So, your affairs with Netflix and book publishers were added important than your ancestors' relationships. Added important than assuming account during times of affliction and transition. That is not what I said, Harry snapped. You are aging my words aloof like the British columnist consistently did. I am not aging anything, Stephanopoulos responded firmly. I am application your own words. You aloof said you had accustomed obligations that prevented you from because your family's feelings. That sounds like you prioritize banking commitments over claimed relationships. Is that an arbitrary characterization? Harry ran his easily through his hair, an action that betrayed his growing desperation. George, you do not accept the complexities of our situation. We had to defend it, our banking future. We had no abutment from the palace, no assets from the aristocratic family. We had to booty affliction of ourselves and our children. No support, Stephanopoulos challenged. Your ancestor was accoutrement, banking abutment alike. Afterwards, you stepped aback from aristocratic duties. That has been documented, and your grandmother larboard you millions in her will. So aback, you say, no support. What absolutely do you mean? Banking abutment came with strings attached, Harry replied hotly. Ascendancy abetment demands that we breach bashful about what happened to us. We could not alive beneath those conditions. So you traded one anatomy of ascendancy for another, Stephanopoulos observed. Instead of Alcazar oversight, you now acquire Netflix executives, book publishers, and alive platforms cogent you what to do. How is that different? How is that better? The catechism acutely ashamed Harry, who confused uncomfortably in his seat. At Atomic now, we acquire a best in what we say and do. At Atomic now, we can acquaint our accuracy after censorship. Your truth, again Stephanopoulos noted. But what happens aback your accuracy conflicts with authentic facts? What happens aback your recollections do not bout official anneal or added people's memories? For example, you claimed in your book that your brother physically attacked you, but you additionally accepted you had been bubbler and were emotionally distraught. How can admirers assurance your adaptation of contest aback your own accompaniment of apperception was compromised? Harry's face angry red with fury. Are you calling me a liar, George? Are you suggesting I fabricated up the attack? I am suggesting that anamnesis is fallible, abnormally beneath stress. Stephanopoulos replied calmly. I am suggesting that your anglability be blacked by your affecting accompaniment and your grievances adjoin your family. I am suggesting that presenting your abstract acquaintance as cold accuracy is ambiguous and potentially harmful. Harmful? Harry laughed bitterly. What is adverse is the arrangement that adequate my family's acceptability, while antibacterial mine. What is adverse is the columnist that angry a dark eye to their mistakes, while accumulative every distinct one of mine. What is adverse is the racism and sexism that my wife faced while anybody affected it was not happening. Let us about that, Stephanopoulos said, abduction on the opening. You acquire fabricated actual austere allegations about racism, oral your ancestors, and the institution. But aback apprenticed for specifics, you acquire bin vague you acquire. Talked about apropos about your son's bark color, but you acquire never called names or provided authentic examples. Why should bodies accept such austere accusations after evidence? Harry's Icily trembled hardly as he absorbed the armchair arms. I acquire bin attention my ancestors by not allotment names, but that does not beggarly. The conversations did not happen. That does not beggarly the racism was not real, but it additionally does not beggarly it was racism, Stephanopoulos countered. Could it not acquire bin innocent curiosity? Could it not acquire bin the aforementioned affectionate of belief that happens in any ancestors aback a new babyish is advancing after context, after names, after specifics? How can anyone appraise whether these were absolutely racist comments or artlessly awkward ancestors' conversations? Because I lived it, Harry replied through gritted teeth. Because I saw my wife's pain, because I watched her attempt with the abreast and the hostility, and that affliction is absolute and valid, Stephanopoulos acknowledged. But affliction does not automatically according racism. Difficulty adjusting to aristocratic activity does not automatically according discrimination. Your wife faced challenges. Absolutely, your brother's wife. So did your father's wife. So did every woman who affiliated into that family. Why is her acquaintance abnormally about chase rather than the accustomed pressures of aristocratic life? The catechism landed like a knockout punch. Harry stared at Stephanopoulos in abashed silence, his aperture, and closing as he struggled to codify a response. The assured prince who had absolved into the flat was gone, replaced by a man who looked cornered and desperate. Harry's abashed blackout continued on for what acquainted like an eternity. Aback, he assuredly spoke. His articulation was almost aloft a whisper, but the microphones best up every word. You acutely do not accept what we went through, George. You cannot possibly appreciate the akin of aggravation and bigotry we faced. Stephanopoulos leaned aback slightly, his announcement actual professionally aloof, admitting the atomic attributes of the moment. Help me understand, then. Accord me one authentic archetype of institutional racism that you alone witnessed. One specific adventure with names, dates, and affairs that acutely demonstrates the bigotry you are alleging. Harry's eyes darted about the flat, as if attractive for an escape route. I acquire already explained that I am attention-assertive ancestors, associates by not absolute specific details, but the arrangement was clear. The analysis was different. The advantage was biased. Those are actual accepted terms, Your Aristocratic Highness, but you acquire fabricated actual specific accusations. You acquire damaged reputations, destroyed relationships, and acquired all-embracing incidents based on these allegations. Surely, you owe the accessible added, then ambiguous references to patterns. I owe the accessible nothing, Harry snapped. His aristocratic accord assuredly arise completely. I acquire accustomed abundant of my activity to accessible service. I acquire sacrificed abundant for the institution. I will not be interrogated like a bent for attention, my wife and children. No one is alleviative, you like a criminal, Stephanopoulos responded evenly. But you are a accessible amount who has fabricated accessible accusations. You acquire profited from those accusations through book deals and media contracts. The accessible has a appropriate to analyze claims that serious. Harry stood up abruptly, his armchair abrading adjoined the floor. This account is over. I will not sit actuality and be ambushed by addition who acutely has in calendar adjoin me and my family. Please sit down, Your Aristocratic Highness, Stephanopoulos said calmly. We still acquire 10 account larboard in our appointed time, and millions of admirers acquainted into apprehend your perspective. Running abroad now will alone reinforce the consequence that you cannot avert your positions, aback challenged. The words hit Harry like a slap. He remained, continuing for a moment, visibly angry with his affections, a forbearing by concave aback into his chair. Fine, but I capital on almanac that this is not the account I was promised. What account were you promised? Stephanopoulos asked. One area no one would ask difficult questions. One area you could echo your talking credibility after challenge, because that is not journalism. That is accessible relations. Harry's jaw clenched. I was told this would be a altercation about Brainy Bloom advancement and my accommodating work. Instead, you acquire spent the absolute time advancing me, personally. I acquire asked you to avert statements you fabricated publicly, Stephanopoulos corrected. Statements that acquire had absolute after effects for absolute people. If you cannot avert those statements, conceivably you should not acquire fabricated them in the aboriginal place. Aggregate I acquire said is true, Harry insisted, but his articulation lacked conviction. Is it Stephanopoulos challenged? Because your adventure keeps changing? In your aboriginal interviews, you said you and your wife were trapped and had no best but to leave. Afresh, you said you were cut off financially and had to bulwark for yourselves. Now, we apperceive your ancestor was acknowledging you and your grandmother larboard, you millions. Which adaptation is true? Harry's face ablaze red again. All of those things can be authentic simultaneously. The bearings was circuitous and acquired. Over time, or your anecdotal acquired to clothing your needs, Stephanopoulos suggested, aboriginal you were victims who had no choice. Afresh, you were alone and penniless. Now you are absolute entrepreneurs. Architecture, your own brand. Anniversary adaptation served your purposes at the time, but they cannot all be accurate. You are putting words in my mouth, Harry protested weakly. I am application, your own words, from your own interviews and your own book, Stephanopoulos replied. If they belie anniversary other, that is not my fault. That is your inconsistency. Harry angled in his armchair, attractive, defeated. George, why are you accomplishing this? What do you achievement to accomplish by disturbing me bottomward on a live television? For the aboriginal time in the interview, Stephanopoulos' expressions ashen slightly. "I am not aggravating to breach you down, your aristocratic highness. I am aggravating to get to the truth. You acquire, positioned yourself as a truth-teller, a whistleblower, a victim of injustice. If they are true, they will bear examination. If they are not, the accessible deserves to know. And if this destroys what is larboard of my accord with—" "My family?" Harry asked quietly. "That accord was damaged continued afore this interview," Stephanopoulos replied. "Your book, your documentaries, your antecedent interviews already did that damage. Today, we are artlessly analytical whether that accident was justified." Harry stared at his hands, bashful for a continued moment. Aback he looked up, his eyes were burnished with unshed tears. "I aloof capital to assure my wife and children. I capital to accord them a bigger activity than I had. I capital to breach the cycle." "Those are admirable goals," Stephanopoulos acknowledged. "But the methods you chose, the accusations you made, the bridges you burned, were they absolutely all-important to accomplish those goals? Could you not acquire adequate your ancestors after antibacterial theirs? The catechism afraid in the air as Harry struggled to compose himself, I do not know. He sighed finally. "I candidly do not apperceive any more." Stephanopoulos nodded slowly. "That may be the best honest affair you acquire," said all morning, "your aristocratic highness. And conceivably it is area healing can begin, with that affectionate of honest self-reflection, rather than connected accusation and victimization," the account assured moments later. Abrogation, both men emotionally drained, and admirers beyond the apple, abashed by what they had witnessed. Harry absolved off the set after the accepted pleasantries. His aristocratic bluff absolutely burst by. 30 account of adamant analytic that had apparent the contradictions and inconsistencies in his anxiously crafted narrative. What did you ahead of this absurd confrontation? Acquire you any time apparent, an account go this absolutely off the rails? Bead your thoughts in the comments below, and accomplish abiding to subscribe for added jaw-dropping celebrity moments that you will not see anywhere else. Let me know, should journalists consistently ask the boxy questions behindhand of someone's appellation or status? Or was Stephanopoulos too acrid in his approach?